All right, welcome everybody. So we're talking about Module 6 implementation. And it's particularly important that we get this thing done today because the online folks need some material to work with. We've been kind of discussing this in class for the last 2 weeks, but the online folks need some material. And I've been recording stuff and it doesn't have the actual sound, right? So thanks for joining. Should I give double attendance points for today? Or would that be like an insult to Indian culture? I feel like, incentive would be an insult? So not really? Kind of not really. All right, anyway. Okay, all right, I'll figure out something. Module 6 implementation. Come on. This is ridiculous now. Okay, very good. All right, so what do we mean by implementation? When you implement something, that means you put it in place, you put it in practice, you put it in use. Yeah? Like my I had a therapist one time who always used to say that the idea of your parents parenting you. Do you know that for your whole life you will need a parented voice? Meaning, none of the good things will ever be natural. You will always need to have a voice in your head saying, do this, do that, do that. Did you know that? So if you are still at a stage where you need a voice telling you to brush your teeth, you're not alone. That's the point, right? Or if you're still at a point where you need a voice to tell you, okay, stop watching TV and go to bed because you have a test tomorrow. Study, work hard, blah blah blah, right? So every day of our life we're implementing the lessons that our parents taught us, right? And like I tell you all, if you want to be your absolute best, everybody needs therapy. Therapy is not something to be ashamed of, Therapy means I'm trying to be the best of myself, right? Therapy is something to be proud of, right? Therapy doesn't mean you walk around and snip it, right? That's not what therapy means. Therapy means you're trying to be your best self, right? When I started to do my PhD, I realized I needed therapy, right? To be my best self, to break out of the norms, to break out of the bad habits, to break out of the limitations that I had for myself. Yeah? All right, very good. Anyway, so we're talking about implementation. And so what we're saying is that when you implement a system is when you put it in use. We've gone through the business process modeling and the revised business process modeling, so we understand what are the system features that are required. That's on our system requirements. We sent our system requirements to a system vendor or 2 or 3, and they filled out some forms to indicate how much of the requirements they provide in their system, right? We've selected a system, we've paid for it. Now it's time to put it in use. That's the implementation part of it. Yeah? That's system implementation. And there are several parts of it. Now, when you are using Facebook app on your phone, or email on your phone, right? Or Instagram on your phone, that's fairly simple. You go to the Apple Store or you go to the Android Store or the Play Store and you download it. You log in, right? All this good stuff. You start using it. For an enterprise system, enterprise meaning one that's used in a business or an organization, large organization, government, school, university, etc., you need an actual implementation process, and that has a couple of parts to it. Now, like I said, we've discussed some of these parts before, but the videos have been terrible. That's why we're recording 2 videos. I'm trying to make sure that we get at least 1 good recording today, right? It's not that I love myself so much that I want to see myself twice. I see myself from different angles. I'm not just trying to get my best angle, right? Right? You have some people like that, You have some people like that. I had this girlfriend from the Philippines one time, right? And everywhere we go, she had to take 100 pictures to make sure we get our best angle, right? Otherwise, she'd complain. We'd have to take 100 photos. Went to SeaWorld down in Miami, had to take 200 pictures, right? But anyway, so the point though is we're going to talk about implementation, right? So implementation. So first we have kind of this little video. Let's watch this little video on implementation. Oh, do we only have? Okay, let's see if we can get some good let's get some good audio. I think I'm only getting audio here, so I have to make it good. Can you hear? Get hear it, man? Now, it's important to understand here that this refers to something called the systems development lifecycle. We're not totally developing a system. In the SDLC, right? And if you've ever heard the term waterfall, or if you've also heard of agile, these are two systems development lifecycles, right? But SDLC actually kind of more referred to the waterfall methodology, where you looked at all the requirements, then you did all the code, you tested all of the programs, etc., etc., implemented everything all at the same time, right? So we're borrowing parts of that, and the part we're borrowing here, we're skipping out the coding part. We did the requirements part and the modeling part with the BPMs and the systems requirement. We're skipping the coding. As we said, we're buying a system from a vendor out there, and then we're coming back to the implementation part of it in the SDLC, right? All right. So, like they said, we will typically acquire new equipment, servers, etc. Now, again, though, people don't really acquire new equipment so much. Mostly they go to the cloud. Yeah? Mostly everything is done in the cloud these days. You may also hire new employees. Now, that's on two sides. On one side, you have the system side. So you may have more people required to manage the system, database administrators, systems administrators, these kind of people, right? But you may also have new types of users, yeah? And typically what's going to happen is that you're going to have more sophisticated users, yeah? Who are, because remember, we're automating a lot of the basic stuff. And then the system is going to do some more sophisticated stuff, right? So we might need more sophisticated users who can use those sophisticated parts of the system, right? And chances are that the people who used to the kind of very basic stuff, manual data entry, very, very basic stuff, they may get redeployed or we might lay them off, right? Now, training employees, very important. We have to make sure that we train them properly to use the system, properly, right? So that it doesn't cause problems. And of course, we have to design the system's physical layout, meaning where the new equipment will be. All right, so we started to talk about parallel implementation on Tuesday, right? And this is where as I mentioned, we had the model company, right? Where you pick an employee from each department of the organization, right? and they represent all of the functions in the organization. That's the pilot phase, right? Now, in the case of the systems requirement, we didn't do a formal RFP, right? What we did was we focused on the guts of the system requirements, right? But what you'd normally do is to build out a request for proposal based on the system requirements. The system requirements would be 90% of the RFP, right? And so essentially, like we said, we'd send the RFPs with the system requirements to the different vendors. They would score their own systems, indicating how many of the system features they are providing, right? And then, if they supply enough of the system features, then we would invite them to come and demonstrate the system, and then we would score them ourselves. We're not going to rely on the system vendor to score the system on our behalf, right? But yeah, the RFP is essential. 90% of the RFP is really the system requirements. There's also something called an RFI, request for information, which looks at the very fundamental aspects of the system, like security, the profitability of the vendor, the how long the vendor has been in business, references from other people who have used this vendor system, etc., right? And that's a request for information, which essentially, they have to pass all of those questions. It's a test that they have to pass everything in order to even be viable, as a system vendor. So self-sourcing is as if these departments that you're studying it is as if they themselves decided to go and look for systems for themselves without using consultants or the IS department, right? That means that it's driven by their own initiative. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about. All right. Very good. So that's kind of an overview of implementation. Let's look at some of the actual parts. Let's look at some of the specific parts of implementation, right? So, sorry, implementation. Yeah, let's look at some of this. Okay, good. Yeah, so let's look at some of the specifics of implementation. So, first is installation, right? Installation simply means we're going to install the system on a server, or as we said, in the cloud, right? That means the system is now usable. We can actually bring up the system on our computer, on our monitor, whatever, and actually plug in data, right? So normally you have a sysadmin or a database administrator. So sometimes if you're a small organization, if you're dealing with a small organization, then they'll need to hire new specialized system administrators in order to manage these new systems, right? Well, not small, medium size. If you're small, then you're probably still not gonna get system administrators. You're probably gonna use the cloud. For sure, you're gonna use the cloud, and you're not gonna manage anything yourself. But medium to large organizations who are implementing a new system may need to get sysadmins and database administrators to implement these systems, right? Essentially, it's getting the code onto the server or in the cloud, right? Just like you install an app on your smartphone. But of course, this time it's on Linux or Windows Server or Unix or something, right? You're going to apply patches to update the software up to the latest version. And of course, you're also going to set up users and roles. Yeah. If you've done Info 6410, we talked about users and roles. So basically, logins for people to log into the system and access the system, right? And then of course, these users will be connected most times with roles. So roles meaning permissions of things that they can do on the system, right? So you're going to have teacher roles, you're going to have student roles. In the case of an LMS, teachers can administer courses, students can log on to courses and do homeworks and so on, right? And then you're going to set up what I call a live and the test environment, right? Now, in terms of environments, you normally have what you call the production and the test environment. The production environment is what users are using. So when you log on to Canvas, you're using the production environment. Yeah, that's what you're seeing, the production environment. It's where production is happening. Now, be careful here. We're borrowing the term production from manufacturing, right? The idea is if you're manufacturing cars, then you have a production environment, right? You're producing. In this case, we're producing knowledge. But production just simply means the live environment, the environment that actual end users actually see, right? Then you're going to also have what you call a test environment. This is where programmers, system administrators, these kind of people can play with the system, right? Make changes to it, test it, verify that things are running properly, etc., right? The users don't see the test environment unless you're like a special, super special user who is directly working with the systems people to modify the system, right? In which case you're not just a regular user. You're almost like a systems person in that case. Some people may also have a prod test environment. This is kind of an in-between environment where once they've gotten the program working the way they want it, they move it into prod test, right? And then it's almost as if it's live. Yeah? It's not with the other test programs. You have specific data that it's being tested with, that's set up in a much more structured kind of way. In the test environment, you can kind of test the programs very arbitrarily. You can just run data through it. You can reuse it arbitrarily. In the prod test environment, for example, it's like the production environment in the sense that you have to use the programs in a certain sequence, right? So in other words, and this is very important to understand as a from a systems management perspective. It's not so much of a consulting or implementation thing, but from a systems management perspective, you need to understand these different environments, right? So like the prod test environment, for example, suppose you had that LMS prod test environment, right? In the test environment, you could just load a screen. Let's say you're testing the homework grading screen, right? You could just load the homework grading screen by itself and punch in data and test it to see if it works. In the prod test environment, you're most likely going to have to use an established teacher user, right? That teacher user has to set up the course, has to set up the assignment, has to go through all the steps. Understand? So they have to go through all the steps before they can test that particular screen, right? In the prod test environment. So it's very much like the production environment, except that users are not actually seeing that screen. Yeah. And that's very close to production. Now, once it tests properly in the prod test environment, then they'll carry it over to the production or live environment. And programmers don't mess around with that environment at all. It's live. It's live. It's like when you're on air in a TV studio, right? It's like, well, which is why it's called live. Yeah, it's like you're live on air. All right. You need training. You need 3 different types of training, right? You need to train people. And there's 3 different categories. You have the users, you have the managers, and you have the IT people. Yeah? So the users need a system overview. What is the system doing? Right? What are some key terms the system uses? What do we mean by grading? What do we mean by assignment? What do we mean by quiz? Yeah? If you have different terms that you used to use, then people need to be updated on the new terminologies, right? And this happens a lot, for example, when you have your little homegrown system. Maybe you have a homegrown system and you're using your little homegrown system to manage the processes in your department. Then now you're going to switch to a system from a system vendor, right? Which is crafted based on industry specifications, based on industry guidelines. So now it's going to use the industry terminologies. Yeah. So they may need to know these new terminologies. They need to know how to start it up, shut it down, log in, log out, main menus and submenus, icons and shortcut keys, major system functions that relate to their processes, especially how to get help, right? FAQs, how to troubleshoot what they're doing, right? So for example, I'm trying to grade an assignment, but I'm not able to download the files from that assignment. How do I troubleshoot that situation? Yeah. What am I doing wrong? Why is it that I can't set up a quiz? Why is it that my quiz isn't adding up to 100%? Troubleshooting, stuff like that. Handling emergencies. Then you, of course, have the managers. They need to understand it from a strategic standpoint. The project origin, the cost-benefit analysis, business goals, how it supports those, how it supports the key performance indicators, for example. Who are the key IT contact people? What happens if the system goes down? Who do I contact and let them know, right? How to handle system changes. This should be system changes. How to handle system changes. How to submit what they call change requests. Yeah, want a new feature or want a feature to change the way it works. We have to submit a change request form. Yeah. So they have to understand how to submit all of that stuff. Managers want to know about reports. Managers live on reports, right? So they have to know how to do their reporting, etc., etc. Then, of course, you need training the IT staff, project history, justification, system architecture, documentation, typical user questions, very, very important. What to tell users when they ask why the mouse is stuck, why they can't go to the next page, why isn't the system loading, why does the system take long to load, etc., etc. Did I tell you that story about the system that was taking, some screens were taking 5 seconds to load and some were taking 30 seconds to load? Did I tell you guys? I didn't. You know that story because you took about 6 courses with me. I tell all about. You're just shaking your head because you want to hear it again. Admit it. Yeah, that's true. Tell them the story. You really don't know it? They had the system, right? They implemented the system. And some screens were taking 5 seconds to load. Some screens were taking 30 seconds to load. And the programmers tried their best to get all the screens to load fast. But some were still taking 5 seconds and some were still taking 30 seconds. Do you know what the solution was? What was the solution? Push everything to 30. Yeah, because I told it the story in summer. I tell it to all my classes. How I don't want to. They made all the screens load in how long? 30 seconds. Yeah, exactly. Then everybody was happy. It's the weirdest thing. Expectations management. No, that's how people are. Some things are fast and some things are slow. You can make them happy by making everything slow. It's weird, but it's true. Yeah. All right. Typical user questions. Vendor support. How do we get support from the vendor? How do we contact the vendor? What's the vendor hotline? How do we get, how do we contact tech support from the vendor, etc., etc.? How do we solve problems that we can't solve in-house? Yeah, etc., etc. All right, let's talk about training. You guys can hear this back there? You guys can hear? Did you hear when they said Bob wanted to upgrade from a typewriter? Bob is very behind the times. Poor Bob. Still using a type. All right, let's see if we can hear it properly. Tell me if you can't hear enough people. Okay, so the idea here is that training is super important, right? Very, very, very important. You gotta train your users properly in order to get the best out of this new system. All right. What are some training materials? You have webinars, podcasts, tutorials, right? Webinar combines web and seminar. It's based on a web podcast. Well, do you know what a podcast is? Podcast typically kind of like radio, right? It's very sound based. And then of course you have tutorials. And of course, like I was showing you guys yesterday or the day before, we have tons of tutorials. Maybe they weren't very publicized, but you have tons of tutorials. For example, for Canvas. If you go to Canvas, there's a ton of tutorials that you can look at. As students. So for example, if you go to Canvas, you go to, come on here. Yeah. Oh, good. So you go to Canvas, you go to help. And there's the Canvas guides for instructors, Canvas guides for students, right? Now, they did actually offer training courses, training seminars for instructors. But of course, since it's thousands of students, then they're not going to offer training for students. But they do offer the guides for the students, right? So you can log on and watch these little handy videos. And now, bearing in mind, you have like a few hundred instructors and many thousand students, right? What you're going to typically find in a system is that the things that a few people do are going to be more complex, and you're going to need training for those, right? So typically you're going to make sure to train managers, top level managers, people who there are few of them, using the system, right? In this case, we're talking about the instructors, the professors, right? Typically, you're going to have to train those people because their job is much more specialized and the way they use the system is much more specialized, right? Now, students are, of course, the important people here, right? The students are the important people, but you have thousands of students, which means that the use of the system for these thousands of users is typically going to be fairly straightforward. It's going to be what you call intuitive, yeah? So how do I upload an assignment? How do I log on? How do I check announcements? It's going to be fairly straightforward, right? And so typically you're not going to really train the thousands. You're going to train the dozens or hundreds for sure, right? But maybe not the thousands. All right, very good. So that's something to make note of. Okay, so some things to know about training. Multimedia. People love multimedia. We're not going back to chalk. What they call chalk and talk. Blackboards. Anybody remember blackboards? The teacher took out a piece of chalk. I see Dario smiling. And then, right? And sometimes when the chalk was low, it would go with what you call edge your teeth, right? And then I had this math. Oh, you want me to tell them that story? Yeah. I was telling everybody. I was telling this other class about in Jamaica. We had some teachers who were very skilled at throwing the chalk, right? So like, see, he's sleeping. You just wake him up with the chalk, right? Just throw the chalk at Nitin. Wake him up. Yeah? That ever happened to you, Nitin? A teacher in school ever throw the chalk at you? No, you can't do that here, though. No. That's a big lawsuit. You throw a chalk at somebody's kid. If you somehow happen to end up teaching in a school in the US, don't ever throw anything at any of those kids. That's a major lawsuit, right? They're going to sue the US government, the school, you, everybody, right? So don't do it. But yeah, man, in Jamaica, they use it. Well, if you are very unfortunate, they would take the duster. Remember those dusters? Yeah, man. Yeah, man. And they were even more accurate with the duster. See, because it's heavier. Yeah. When that hit you, man, leave a nice bump. Yeah, man. You walk on the street after class and you say, wait, what happened? Oh, you were sleeping in class. Okay. That's what happens when you sleep in class, right? All right. Train people in groups because typically people will help. Well, it's not only much more efficient the way I'm training you in groups now, teaching you in groups. It's not only more efficient in terms of economies of scale, but of course, people will help each other out. You know what I mean? And also you'll get better questions in terms of what happens if we're entering this data and this happens. And I was entering this data and one time and that happened. How would you deal with it? Train people at a good place like the company, right? So they don't have to leave their job. They're not worried about driving back and forth to their job and this and that and that. Hearing, seeing, and doing. Use all the senses. You ever heard the saying that people remember, like they say, people remember 10% of what they hear, 50% of what they see, 80% of what they do, and 100% of what they, what they do is what they experience. Good try. But 100% of what they believe? What's the opposite of learning? Huh? Yeah, they understand it too. What's the opposite of learning? Well, not, all right. No, the flip side of learning is what? All right, let me try this a different way. What's the counter? All right. In a classroom, you have people who learn and people who? This is working out real good. Boy, sometimes you just, all right. In a classroom, you have many people who learn and one person who? Teach. Yeah, you actually remember 100% of what you teach. Who said teach? Who said teach? assist a man on fire. Yeah, yeah. You remember 100% of what you teach. Yeah. So 10% of what you hear, 50% of what you see, 80% of what you do, and 100% of what you teach. Yeah. So if you have people teaching others, then what you end up with is kind of people who can train other people and help other people after you've done that formal user training, right? You rely on previous trainees, which is what, um, which is building on that idea. Previous trainees who learned how to do it and can now teach others, etc. Include step by step. This is so absolutely important in everything you do. Step by step instructions. Step by step instructions. And it's the oddest thing that I find that master students sometimes they sometimes they think that step by step is bad. Right? Step by step is good. Step by step is good. I see a lot of projects, and I tell you guys, follow the examples. Do it exactly the way I do it. And somehow they think that mastery means that they can skip steps. They can show me that they can skip steps in the calculations, for example. Right? But that's not the kind of mastery I'm looking for. I want you to model what I'm doing exactly. Right? I want you. Now, when you're writing an essay as a master student, you don't want to say every little thing. You don't want to, you know, introduce every little idea and explain every little thing. But in the case of the deliverables, right, you want to do it exactly the way I do it. Step by step is good. Step by step is good. Did I tell you guys about the professor that I used to go to his office hours? Hmm? I had this professor who was teaching statistics. I thought I told you guys the story now. Come on, guys. You just love stories. Eh? All right. I had this professor, right? I was doing statistics first semester of my. This is all about step by step. So I had this statistics class, and I hadn't done statistics for 15 or 20 years. One of them, right? Long time, very long time. I mean, I did some statistics in my masters, but I hadn't done statistics since undergrad. So anyway, I knew okay if I don't pass this course, back to Jamaica, back to Jamaica, right? Because yeah, I was one of them. I was one of them that, people talk about oh people use education as a way to migrate. Yeah, I'm one of them. I'm not ashamed of it either, right? I'm not ashamed. I use education to migrate here. So what? Anyway, so I know if I don't pass this course, I'm back to Jamaica, right? And so I was so afraid of the statistics course, right? So afraid, so afraid. The oddest thing is it's the course that I got the only A. The 11 courses is the one A I got. Everything else was A minus and B plus. I had a 3.5 average when I finished. The one course that I was deathly afraid of was the one that I got the A for. But this story, is about coping, adapting, taking responsibility, doing what you need to do, being the captain of your own ship, right? Instead of going to your professor and saying, Professor, my scholarship depends on this course, and I'm not doing good. How can you help me? That wasn't going to work for me, right? So I like this course, and I'm scared of this course. So you know what I did? I went through that course material line by line by line, calculation by calculation by calculation, step by step. Great detail, the greatest detail. I took possession of that course because I decided my future, because I give up my job in Jamaica. I have nothing to go back to Jamaica. Nothing. Right? Right? Because I left the industry, etc., etc. Okay. So I decided to take responsibility for this. So I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. The notes that the professor gives, I'm going to go through them step by step by step by step, calculation by calculation. Now, 2 times this happened to me. I went to the professor's office hours every single week, sometimes 3 times a week. That's how I decided I'm going to take responsibility for my future and take charge of my destiny, right? 2 times he said this to me. He said, because I used to go through the calculations, and then what I would do is, I wouldn't go to the professor and say, Professor, I don't understand this calculation. I would go to the professor and say, Professor, I see how you calculated line 1, line 2, line 3. But between line 3 and line 4, I don't follow. I don't understand what you're doing here. When I did the calculation, the result you have is 498. When I do the calculation, it's 512. When I tell you I went through the man's things line by line by line, you know, I meant line by line by line. You know what the professor said to me 2 times? He said, I've been using these PowerPoints for 15 years and nobody ever saw that mistake. Got it? I found 2 mistakes in the man's calculations that he'd been using for 15 years that nobody else saw. And the point is, when your destiny is in front of you and something is threatening it, you take charge of it, you face it head on. You deal with it head on. And you challenge it. And you take it by the horns. Right? The man said, twice the man said to me, I've been using these PowerPoints for 15 years and nobody else has ever seen those mistakes. I found 2 mistakes. That's what you do when you're afraid of failing a course. You don't go to the professor and say, Professor, my scholarship. No. Got it? All right, very good. Training materials should resemble actual screens. So in other words, look like the actual things, right? And tasks in your training should be typical of a user's daily work. So meaning, you train a batch of users together, and it's what they actually do in their daily work, also known as their process, the activities that they do in their process. Everybody with me? All right, very good. End user training. So you can have train the trainer, which is where you train people to train other people. That means after you've done the end user training, there's people inside of the employees who can train other people. If a new person comes in, they can train that person. If people forget how to do something, they can train that person. Yeah? If somebody is trying to figure out how to do something in the system, they can train that person, right? Then you have functional training, which focuses on the specific tasks that the employees must perform, right? So kind of like typical of a user's daily work, right? It's just another way of saying this. And then you have formal training to show employees all the workings of the system. So you just go through everything the system can do, and just show them, okay, this screen does that, that screen does that. So it's not so much functional or process oriented. It's just, you're just showing them everything that can be done in the system, right? Because sometimes you need to use screens that are not necessarily part of a specific process. Yeah. And then of course you can have links to training videos for thousands of users like students. All right. So you have training. You also have system configuration, right? So system configuration, if you think of implementing the system like building the walls of this classroom, then configuration is like putting in the chairs, right? And the chairs, of course, are like, so the rows are like tables, and then the chairs are like actual bits of data that they, that the data can sit, right? Containers for the data, yeah. So you need to set up your database, set up your tables that can accommodate the data that you will generate and create, right? And then, of course, you're going to set up things like codes, room codes, course codes, machine codes, meal codes, Wi-Fi troubleshooting codes, right? Laptop return codes, event codes, event codes. Yeah. Um, dining codes, dining codes, meal codes, or what other codes? You want to tell us something? What other codes we could set up in your system? Meal code. What else? I see you want to give us something, so give us something. Discount codes. What else? All right, think about it. So we're gonna come back to you. All right, so you can give us something. As a teacher, you can't suffocate people when they want. You can't suffocate students who want to contribute, right? And you were in a contributing mood. So yeah, yeah. All right, data conversion. We started to talk about data conversion and migration, but like I said, the video was terrible. That's why I'm trying to record two versions of the video, right? Like I said, it's not because I'm trying to find my good side, right? These videos not in sync, but anyway. But the point is, I'm not trying to find my good side. I'm just trying to make sure I have a good recording for the online group, right? Because I need a good recording of this step. All right, data conversion, most important step. Everybody's going to be involved, right? It's basically moving data from the old system to the new system. Now, the old system, of course, might be paper-based, might be spreadsheet-based, right? Might be another system. But the idea is that you want to move the existing data that's currently being used to the new system so that people can continue servicing the current clients, right? You already have events you're converting, and you already have events planned. You have to move those events from the old system to the new system, right? Now, when we talk about phased and pilot and so on, that's one thing you can do. You might say, okay, let me finish servicing the old clients. Wait, you guys with us? You guys with us? You guys with us? Can't stop thinking, but you guys thinking about the Wally? Yeah, man, you have to come do a dance for us too, you know, before you let you go, right? Who's the dancer in that? They can't make up their mind who the dancers. Anyway, yeah. So conference services is kind of easy. You could say, okay, we're gonna finish doing all the events that we have planned on the old system. We're gonna continue new events on the new system. But in the case, for example, of learning management systems, now notice, for example, this, what they did was they switched over from Blackboard to Canvas in between the semesters. You would never want to move Blackboard data to Canvas data in the middle of a semester, right? But yeah, data conversion is extremely important, and it's the trickiest step. Is where you're most likely going to fail, if you're going to fail, right? Very, very failure prone. You have to move data formats, and then sometimes getting the data is tricky. Sometimes some systems, for example, don't really have a sort of way to export the data from the old system so you can use it in a new system, right? Or it may export it in some weird, crazy format that you have to write programs to now manipulate that data into a new format that the new system can accept it, right? So data conversion, super, super tricky. It's You definitely want all the users involved, right? You want to plan it, you want to put time into it, you want to put resources into it, and you want to test it very well. That's data conversion. All right, testing. So what is software testing? Uh-oh. Now, mostly how he explains it. So this guy, he has a whole channel on software testing, right? And you can get certifications and so on, right? He has whole sets of tutorials on software testing. He's kind of explaining it from the perspective of software that you've written yourself, right? But but it's also very relevant to testing software that you bought and you're implementing, because understand something, when people sell you software, they're selling you what's called good enough software. It's never perfect. It's going to have flaws, it's going to have bugs. Yeah, it's going to be good enough. So you want to make sure that whatever flaws are in the software are not fatal. Yeah, and they're going to mess up your actual implementation. All right, so and I like how he builds it up, because what he's saying is, listen, anytime you get something from anybody, it needs to be tested. Anytime you buy something, you have to test it. Yeah? You buy anything at all, you test it. When you buy a new car, you have to test it. Right? You buy a house, you have to test it. Everything needs to be tested. Yeah? Hmm. All right, and he's going to explain some more about testing. He has a whole channel, um, and he has a whole series of tutorials that you can watch on testing. There's some mega millionaire called Caroline Dobson that we're not interested in knowing about. All right, so let's talk about system changeover. Let's talk about. Wait, hold on. Wait, hold on. Let me see something. I think I have a mistake in the slide here. System testing. Okay, yeah, slide out of place. All right, yeah. So there's different types of testing that he's going to tell you about. Um, Unit testing, where you test a particular program or a particular screen, right? You put in the test data that the screen requires, and you make sure that it produces the result that that screen should produce. There's integration testing, where you look at how all the programs interact, right? For example, once you enter data into one screen, it should change the way the data shows on another screen that comes after, etc., etc. Right? You kind of test it as a process. Integration testing is kind of like what we've been looking at in terms of the activities in a process. Yeah. System testing, entire information system, all processing situations, assure users, developers, and managers that program meets all the specifications, right? Etc. And it's the key to user and management approval. Then you have user acceptance testing, where basically the user sign off and say, this system does everything that we require it to do, right? So lots of different types of testing. Unit testing, where you test a particular program. Integration testing, where you see how the programs interact with each other. The outputs from one program should look good in when you look at outputs from one screen should look good in another screen, etc., etc. So across the whole process. System testing, you test the system as a whole. Then you have volume testing, where you make sure that the system runs, that the volume of data that you can put in, that you put into the system can manage it, right? So in other words, when you have what you call end of period processing. So for example, end of week processing or end of month processing, where you calculate taxes or you calculate interest. If you're a credit card company, you calculate interest every month. If you're a government service and you're calculating penalties, then you probably calculate penalties every month, etc., etc. If you're a bank, you calculate the interest on deposits every month, etc., etc., right? Well, you have to run those processes, and you have to make sure that the processes can run fairly quickly. It doesn't take forever to run those processes, right? It can run in just a few hours. And then, of course, like we said, you have acceptance testing, where the users accept the system and they sign off and say, okay, we're ready to actually start using the system. Okay, last big thing we want to talk about is change management. And we started to talk about it on Tuesday, but yeah, again, we had some problems with the video. So this is why I'm recording two versions of the video, right? From my webcam and from this thing here, this other one over here. 4 types: direct cutover, also known as plunge; parallel, also known as parallel; pilot; and phase. Now, this is kind of a little diagram of how they look. Direct cutover or plunge, you stop using one system on December 31st. On January 1st, you start using the new system. Like we said, that's fine if you don't even have a proper system to use, and you're simply going to start using a new system, right? Or if the old system was just terrible or caused a lot of problems or had a lot of errors in it. Yep. Parallel, you're using both systems side by side, and it's just, like we said, it's the safest but the most expensive, because you're verifying the outputs from the old system with the outputs from the new system. You're making sure that the way the system treats the data, you're making sure that the way both systems treat the data is the same, right? So if you're a bank, again, the old system should be calculating the same amount of interest on every account as the new system, right? Etc. If you're the government, it should be calculating the same taxes. Suppose a property tax system, right? Should be calculating the same property tax on all the properties, right? Etc. etc. Pilot. So with pilot, you keep using the old system, but a small part of the company uses the new system. Now remember, this is a small, what we might call a model company, where you select people from every department. Yeah. So you have the whole organization represented in that small model company, and they're using their entire system to make sure that, all the operations of the new system are working properly. Phased is where you might implement the system in manufacturing, then you implement the accounting part, then you implement the marketing part, then you implement the HR part, right? So you're implementing in different departments. So, a little bit more formal. Plunge approach. Replace the old system immediately with the new. Least expensive but highest risk. You wouldn't do this in a hospital scenario, right? You have no backup option available. So that means that if the new system is not working properly, your what is this 5-letter word? It starts with S, and I can't say it, but I think you know which word that is. No, it's a 6-letter word. Yeah, you're not good. It's not good. Suitable for low budget scenarios despite the risk. So in other words, if you just don't have the manpower to be entering data into 2 systems at the same time, then that's probably the thing you want to do anyway. Small mom and pop shop, probably what you want to do anyway, right? There's no huge reputational loss or risk of lawsuits if something goes wrong. Parallel, old and new are operating fully for the time it takes to verify that the new system is working the way you want it to. Minimal risk is the safest, right? Old systems not only serves as a backup in case the new system doesn't work out, but also you're verifying that the new system is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. most expensive, as we said, double data input, etc., etc. Pilot operation. New system is implemented at a selected location first. Pilot site. You have the model organization that is using the system, right? And the rest of the company keeps using the old system, right? And you have a reduced risk by testing the new system in a limited area first. So, for example, it can be the way I explained it is a model company situation. So, for example, in an AUM, what you do is you take members of staff, members of faculty from every department, every college, right, who represent all the other departments, right? So very, very limited set of people, and you test out the whole system, right? But suppose it was a national, like 100 dealerships, right? You could just say, okay, we're going to test it in 100 dealership. And if it works out, then we implement it across all the 100 dealerships, right? So that's another way you could look at pilot. All right, phased. New system is implemented in stages or modules, typically by department, right? You implement it in one department at a time. And as you get working in one department, then you implement it in the next set of departments, and you keep going, right? And so it limits the risk to specific modules or specific departments. All right, and that's basically all I have to share. Now, it's time to take some attendance and see who is here. And I'm pretty sure